Alright, what's poppin'? It's 3 in the morning. We're talking about German unification. There's no better time to be talking about German unification, honestly. If it's not a school night at 3 in the morning, you're not doing it right at all. So here we go. Now, just to preface this entire thing, one, I talk very fast. I just get your pencils ready, because you're going to have to write some notes fast. The second thing, there's a lot to cover here, and this is probably like a multi-day topic being covered by a high school student in 5 to 10 minutes. I'll probably take the full 10. I apologize for that. Now, I do have some notes and some maps here, but I'm taking this on like selfie cam, so it's going to be all inversed, so the maps aren't going to be that useful. I'm using them for reference, but, you know, I mean, they're here. So, the thing with German unification that I'll just start out with is that you have to remember that there were German people, but not a Germany, right? So at this time in Europe, basically 1850s, it really goes to the early 1800s, but we'll kind of cut to the early 1850s for this. There was the Holy Roman Empire, but that encompassed a lot of other countries, right? So you had Prussia, Austria, and then even kind of French territories and everything in newfound Italy. And all this was getting involved in the Holy Roman Empire, where basically it was almost kind of like this conglomeration of a bunch of empires, parts of their territories being made into one. However, the issue with that is there's independent land that's part of the Holy Roman Empire, because there's also a Holy Roman Emperor, but he's also the Emperor of Austria at the same time, and so Austria has territory that isn't just the Holy Roman Empire. I could go on about this for another hour. You can see how it gets complicated real fast. But basically understand where Germany is now, Holy Roman Empire, except a bit bigger, but it's not just one country. A bunch of different countries are involved in this one territory. Okay, it's complicated, but you get that. The German people who are there all speak a common language. So this is, throughout history, has been a driving factor. When a group of people shares religion, culture, language, or a combination of those things, they feel a tie, and nationalism is formed, right? So starting around this time in the mid-1800s, there's already this populist movement would be a word to describe it, except you'd have to be elaborated on, where basically kind of educated people like college students and etc. were kind of getting involved in this movement for a unified nation. Now, the average farming people in kind of rural areas and everything, it didn't really make a difference to them, because at this time territories were being swapped, you know, from country to country constantly. It was just a normal thing that happened. You look at Alsace-Lorraine, it was German, then French, then German, then French. It's the type of thing that when it happens so much, you just kind of get used to it. So the same thing is happening here in Germany at this time, where there's a fairly large group of people, but a comparative minority of the population who are for this unification, because for a good, like, the blue-collar workers, it didn't really matter to them. Now, this is where the sense of nationalism is important, because nationalism affects everyone. I mean, and you can see that in America, especially almost blue-collar workers, etc., have a strong sense of nationalism, and so that's a big part of the reason why German unification worked, is because these kind of college students and movements that were typically reserved to kind of the higher echelons kind of had this French effect, where it kind of was able to trickle down, for some sweet Reaganomics for you, where it would trickle down to the lower classes, and they kind of got involved on the action, and they were kind of the boots on the ground, really, for this whole movement. But there were two main movements for German unification: the Klein Deutschland, which is basically translated to small Germany, and then Große Deutschland, which is large Germany. Now, the big difference here is that the large Germany, the Große Deutschland, included German-speaking parts of the Austrian Empire. And this was an issue because the Austrian Empire was powerful at the time. The issue was that they had a neighbor who was much more powerful in Prussia. So we've seen a repetition of this in history, where when Hitler came to power, he wanted German-speaking territories that weren't a part of Germany at the time, but they were German-speaking people in those territories, and so therefore he wanted control of those territories. And you can see, again, not the same thing, but it's the same idea. There's German-speaking people in this territory. We want them to be a part of our nation, empire, etc. It's all the sense of nationalism. And so this kind of was growing and growing and growing. And at the same time, as I mentioned, Prussia was a powerhouse. They were basically a Sparta of mainland Europe at this point, where they were very militarily focused. And at the same time that this is all happening, in around 1861, excuse me, I gotta look at the dates here. I'm not that good on this stuff. Wilhelm I takes power, and this is important because of what he does. He appoints Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck, also known as the Iron Chancellor. If you are into history, then, I mean, you know about this guy. Huge warship named after him later on. Doesn't, you know, go too well, but it happens. And so this guy was a mastermind for European diplomacy at the time. Bismarck knew how to play countries and how to make it seem like someone else was the aggressor when he's the one who really kind of started it all. So he kind of masterminded all these wars and all these in these games, really. These political games is the best way to put it. Where he would, for instance, like, receive a letter, and he basically rewrote it, kind of, to the point where it sounded like the person who responded was the aggressor, right? And that's simplifying it to, like, a drastic degree, but I'm already at 7 minutes here, so I'm going to kind of have to hurry this up. But Bismarck was sly. He was a slick dude. He knew how to play countries. He really just, he wanted to make Prussia a military powerhouse and gain as much political power as he possibly could for Prussia. He wasn't, again, he was a chancellor there for Prussia. He wasn't like an emperor at the time. But he was appointed as chancellor by Wilhelm I. And so he was able to basically use all these political games and tactics to his advantage, to the point where Prussia basically started wiping people out. And they used Denmark. Denmark basically declared war on Prussia and Austria. Prussia teamed up with Austria, went to war with Denmark, took territories up in Denmark. Austria had to go through Prussia to get to their territories in Denmark. Prussia used that as a sign of an act of aggression by Austria to declare war against Austria, to go fight and destroy Austria. Now, on the inside, if you were Austria or Prussia, you know that was as dirty as it could be. Like, that was such a slick move where you're giving them territory, but you know that they're going to have to go through your territory, but then you're going to say that's an act of aggression when you knew that was going to be what has to happen. But either way, it worked. And when he did this, he was able to push back Austria. And at the same time, the French were trying to get up on Prussia at the edges of their border. And they used this at the same time of being like, hey, we're the victim. Everyone's coming at us right now. We're just fighting for these nationalistic people. We're just doing what they want. The Prussians push all the way to Versailles, into France. They go from their borders in Prussia and push all the way past Versailles in France. They straight World War II Germany it up into France. And in the Palace of Versailles, in 1871, they declare the creation of the German Empire. And so basically, they push all the way up into Versailles in France and declared this German Empire, and basically have this unification of all these German states. Now, what continues is how these German states were run in smaller areas where they're kind of split up. That's what these maps kind of reference, is the areas in which they're split up changes, but the way in which they are done so stays. So it's kind of like districting for schools, where the districts for schools might change, but the way that it's done typically stays the same. And a lot of it stayed the same because these people have been nationalistic for so long. But yeah, I got 5 seconds left, so I think you get the gist.